know how you support public education.
Public education, my eldest daughter just started college, which was a traumatic thing for us. As those of you who have kids, you would know that is not an easy thing to go through as a parent. But I can tell you, Nancy and Billy and Johnny, our three kids, were all very well prepared by a local elementary school and our middle school. They went on to a private high school, but they got a great education. I'm the product of public education. I taught in a public school. And I feel very strongly about the need for us to invest in education. And that's one of the reasons why, over the last, particularly the last 6 years, I've been a vocal advocate for funding for our K through 12 education. When Tom Corbett cut funding by $1 billion a year for K through 12, cut our public colleges by another $200 to $300 million a year, I and many other of our members in the Democratic caucus fought very hard to try to stop that. And ultimately, when Governor Wolf came in, I fought and continue to fight to try to restore that funding. I know as a former teacher how important it is that we have the investment. Money doesn't solve everything, but it does make a difference in quality education. And here's one of the big points about it that really matters. Class size. You can teach for about a day, and it should become evident to you that class size has a real impact on your ability to get through to the kids. When I was teaching at Ben Salem, the contract maximum class size was 33 kids. Right? That's a lot of kids in the room. I was teaching high schoolers. I was teaching 11th and 12th graders. When I taught the upper level courses, like AP History or AP Government, those classes were about 20 kids. Sometimes they were as low as 15. It was counterintuitive because the kids that needed it the most, they needed that attention the most, were actually getting grouped into these really large classes. And the kids that were, they were really, they were doing the work, they were self-motivated. Sure, they needed a good teacher, but they didn't quite need that kind of attention that the other kids did. They were in the smaller classes. You could do so much more with a class of 20 kids than you could with a class of 33. It's just the reality. So that's one place where, for example, the money makes a difference, because if you have more staff and if you have buildings that accommodate it, you can have smaller classes, and that can make a big difference. So it's just one example. There are a lot of others out there as well. But one thing I really want to dispel right now is this myth that has been propagated now for the last 30 some odd years that our public schools are failing. Nothing can be further from the truth. And if you look at the numbers, and I've looked pretty closely at this, we actually in this country do a great job through the primary years. And for kids of higher socioeconomic background, we do continue to do pretty well for them through secondary level as well. And this is in comparison to their peers in other countries throughout the world. Where we need to improve is for those kids who are from a less privileged background when you get into that secondary level. That's where a lot of them start to fall off. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Part of it might be tracking into upper and lower level classes, and that's something we have to look at. But putting more resources into that and making sure those kids that are more at risk are getting what they need, along with the early childhood education, is a critical point too, because that ultimately saves a lot of money down the road. You can really have an impact, and that's why we need to support our public schools to make sure that's happening on a regular basis.
What is your perspective of Black Lives Matter?
Well, I think everyone matters, and I don't mean to be flippant by saying that. I think we have a situation in this country right now where the first thing we need to do is kind of dial back the rhetoric, and we need to find a place where we can have reasonable discussions about real issues. And those real issues are real issues about making sure that everyone and civil rights are being respected, making sure that the police are being respected, making sure that we have the very best training available for our police to help diffuse situations that are tense and could potentially end in tragedy. But it starts with dialing back the rhetoric and trying to come to the middle and bring people together to have a real dialogue about these real issues. I think the president said it very well. He talked about how our police are being asked to do very difficult jobs, sometimes under difficult circumstances. And that needs to be recognized. And so too does the fact that there are many communities in our country whose rights over the history of our country have not always been respected, and we need to make sure those rights are respected. So we have a lot to do as a country, but it starts with making sure that we can get to a place where we can actually have the conversation. And it's not an either-or proposition.
Sir, last question. Regarding national security, particularly when it comes to countries that have demonstrated aggressive tendencies like North Korea, what do you feel is the best approach to dealing with these nations?
I think the best approach is always diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy. I think it's important that if, for example, sanctions can often be a very useful tool in helping to get rogue actors like the North Koreans to comply with international law or international norms. But those sanctions are only effective when they are observed multilaterally by the international community as a whole, not by just one or two countries. Because if you don't do it that way, then you're basically subverting the whole idea of the sanctions, because cash and goods can still get through, and that undermines what you're trying to do. So I think it's important that we focus on that kind of approach with our allies, and sometimes with countries that are not necessarily our allies, but who have common interests